he reportedly banned fish from Graceland entirely because he couldn't stand the smell. It's said he once shot a television set simply because singer Robert Goulet appeared on the screen. Sources claim he despised blue jeans so much he associated them with hard labor and poverty from his youth. He allegedly hated some of his own movie songs, finding them silly or meaningless. People close to him reported he couldn't stand anyone, absolutely anyone, touching his famous hair without permission. Number 10. Dark socks. Okay, let's start with something seemingly small, almost trivial, but apparently a big deal for the king of rock and roll, socks. Yes, socks, we all wear them. They're a fundamental part of getting dressed for most people on most days. You pull them out of the drawer. Maybe you match them if you're feeling fancy. Maybe you grab the first two you find if you're in a hurry. They come in all colors, patterns, and lengths. Black socks, navy socks, gray socks. These are staples in many wardrobes, right? They go with suits, they go with casual wear, they hide dirt well, practical, standard every day. But not for Elvis Presley. According to numerous accounts from those who knew him, who worked for him, who lived with him at Graceland, Elvis had a peculiar aversion to dark-colored socks. Specifically, black or navy blue socks were reportedly a no-go. Think about that. This man, who burst onto the scene in electrifying pink and black outfits, who wore flashy jumpsuits adorned with rhinestones and studs, who defined an entire era of flamboyant style, apparently drew the line at dark socks. Sources close to him, including members of his entourage often called the Memphis Mafia, have mentioned this quirk over the years. It wasn't just a mild preference, it was reportedly a strong dislike. If you were around Elvis, particularly in his inner circle or working closely with him, wearing dark socks was apparently frowned upon or at least noticed with disapproval. Why? The exact reason remains, like many things about Elvis, somewhat shrouded in personal preference and legend. Some reports suggest it was purely aesthetic. Elvis was meticulously attentive to his appearance, from his perfectly coiffed hair down to his shoes. Perhaps dark socks just didn't fit his visual ideal. Maybe they broke the line of his often light-colored trousers or elaborate stage costumes in a way he found jarring. He often favored white or light-colored socks, which would certainly stand out, especially with the loafers or dress shoes he frequently wore off stage. White socks might have felt cleaner, sharper, or simply more in line with the vibrant, attention-grabbing image he cultivated. Imagine the scene, Graceland, a hub of activity, friends, employees, musicians coming and going. And amidst all the music, laughter, and late-night conversations, there's this unwritten rule: check your sock color. It sounds almost comical, but it speaks volumes about the specific, sometimes eccentric, world Elvis built around himself. He controlled his environment, his image, and apparently even the hosiery choices of those nearby. It wasn't about the socks themselves, perhaps, but about maintaining a certain standard, a specific look, an environment curated exactly to his liking. In a life that became increasingly public and scrutinized, maybe these small details, these seemingly minor dislikes, were ways for Elvis to exert control, to shape his immediate reality down to the smallest thread. He designed his own jewelry, tinted his cars, dictated the decor of Graceland. Why not extend that control to the color of the socks worn around him? So, Next time you pull on a pair of plain black or navy socks, perhaps give a fleeting thought to the king. For most of us, they're just socks. But for Elvis Presley, they were reportedly an everyday item that fell firmly into the dislike category, a small but telling detail in the larger-than-life tapestry of his world. It's a reminder that even global icons have their unique, sometimes baffling, pet peeves, things that rub them the wrong way, no matter how ordinary they seem to the rest of us. The man who shook up the world with his music and moves apparently preferred his ankles and those around him to be clad in lighter shades. Number 9. Being tickled, tickling. For many, it's a playful gesture, a source of laughter, maybe a little bit of squirming. It happens between parents and children, friends, romantic partners. It's often spontaneous, a light-hearted interaction involving touch and surprise. You might get tickled on your ribs, your feet, the back of your neck. The reaction is usually involuntary. Gasps, shrieks, uncontrollable laughter, maybe even a bit of panicked flailing. It's a common everyday physical interaction, rooted in nerve endings and social bonding, or sometimes playful annoyance. But for Elvis Presley, being tickled was reportedly no laughing matter at all. Sources close to the king, including friends and former partners like Linda Thompson, have described an intense, almost visceral aversion to being tickled. It wasn't just a mild, "Oh, stop that," kind of reaction. It was said to provoke genuine anger and extreme displeasure. Imagine this larger-than-life figure, a man known for his captivating stage presence and physical grace, completely losing his cool over something as seemingly innocuous as a tickle. Why such a strong reaction? It's suggested that Elvis had a thing about control. Being tickled is by its nature an experience where you lose control of your body's reaction. The laughter, the squirming. It's involuntary. For someone like Elvis, who meticulously crafted his image and movements, who commanded stages and audiences, perhaps this loss of physical autonomy, even in jest, felt deeply uncomfortable or even threatening. He was the one who dictated the terms, the one in charge. A surprise tickle attack completely upended that dynamic. Linda Thompson shared anecdotes about discovering this dislike early in their relationship. A playful tickle attempt reportedly resulted in a surprisingly harsh reaction, making it clear this was a boundary not to be crossed. It wasn't about playfulness. It was perceived as an invasion, a disruption. It suggests a possible sensitivity to touch, particularly unexpected touch, or perhaps a deep-seated need to always be the one initiating physical interactions on his own terms. Think about his stage persona. Powerful, deliberate, every move calculated for maximum effect. Even his moments of apparent spontaneity felt orchestrated. Off-stage, he cultivated an environment where he was the center, the undisputed king. Being subjected to something that made him react involuntarily, that made him seem momentarily helpless or silly, might have clashed fundamentally with his sense of self and the control he maintained over his persona and his surroundings. It could also simply be a matter of heightened physical sensitivity. Some people are genuinely physically uncomfortable with tickling. It feels less like fun and more like an unpleasant assault on their senses. Given Elvis's reported sensitivity in other areas, like noise, which we might get to, it's plausible that tickling just felt physically bad to him, triggering a fight or flight response rather than amusement. Whatever the root cause, the message was clear. Do not tickle the king. It was one of those everyday, often affectionate gestures that was completely off-limits in his world. It paints a picture of a man who, despite his immense fame and public persona, had distinct personal boundaries and sensitivities. The playful touch that might delight or mildly annoy the average person was, for Elvis Presley, reportedly a source of intense displeasure, a surprising vulnerability beneath the cool exterior. It adds another layer to the complex portrait of the man behind the legend, powerful and commanding, yet perhaps surprisingly sensitive to the loss of control that comes with an unexpected tickle. Number 8. Yelling and loud noises. Unexpectedly, life is noisy. Cars honk, people shout across streets, televisions blare, music pumps from speakers, children laugh and scream with abandon. We live in a soundscape, much of it loud, chaotic, and unpredictable. Arguments erupt, sudden bangs make us jump, crowds roar. For most of us, navigating this auditory landscape is just part of daily existence. We might get annoyed by excessive noise, but generally, we process it, tune it out, or accept it as background chatter. However, Elvis Presley reportedly had a strong dislike for sudden, unnecessary yelling and loud, jarring noises, particularly within his personal space. This might seem paradoxical for a man who was the epicenter of rock and roll, a genre defined by loud music and screaming fans. His concerts were decibel-shattering events. His life was often surrounded by the boisterous energy of his entourage. Yet, accounts suggest that within his own controlled environments like Graceland or his hotel suites, he preferred a certain level of calm and quiet, and could react negatively to unexpected outbursts or excessive volume. Sources describe him having a low tolerance for shouting matches or people raising their voices unnecessarily in his presence. While Elvis himself was known to have a fiery temper and could certainly raise his own voice when angered, he seemed to dislike being subjected to other people's uncontrolled volume or chaotic noise. Perhaps it was again about control. He controlled the volume on stage. He expected to control the volume in his private life. Imagine the scene at Graceland after a tour or a long recording session. Elvis seeking refuge, wanting peace. Then perhaps a member of his staff or a friend gets into a loud argument, or someone cranks up a television or radio without warning. Reports suggest this kind of disruption could genuinely upset him, leading to sharp rebukes or demands for quiet. It wasn't necessarily about the type of noise. Music was fine. The energy of his friends was often welcome, but about the uncontrolled, unexpected, or unnecessarily aggressive nature of it. Some attribute this to his Southern upbringing, where manners and a certain level of decorum were often emphasized even behind closed doors. Shouting indoors might have been seen as disrespectful or uncouth. Others suggest it was simply a matter of frayed nerves. Living under the constant pressure of fame, the endless demands, the lack of privacy, maybe his tolerance for additional sensory overload was just low. He needed his home base to be a sanctuary, and sudden loud noises shattered that sense of peace. There are stories of him reacting strongly to things like firecrackers being set off nearby or loud machinery operating close to his home. It wasn't just yelling. It was any sudden, invasive sound that broke the desired atmosphere. This sensitivity seems to stand in stark contrast to the image of the rock and roll wild man, but it highlights the difference between a public persona and private reality. The roar of the crowd was the sound of adoration and success. The unexpected shout or bang at home was an intrusion. Think about the pressure Elvis lived under. Every move watched, every word potentially recorded. Perhaps this reported dislike for loud, unexpected noise was a reaction to the constant noise of fame itself. He craved moments of predictability and calm, and jarring sounds were a reminder of the chaos he couldn't always escape. It adds another dimension to his personality, the stadium-filling superstar who, in his private moments, reportedly just wanted a little peace and quiet, and strongly disliked the everyday cacophony that most of us take for granted. He could command thousands with his voice, but reportedly bristled when voices were raised uncontrollably around him. Number 7. Robert Goulet appearing on his television. Watching television? It's arguably one of the most common, everyday activities across the globe. We flip through channels, catch a movie, watch the news, enjoy a favorite sitcom or drama. Sometimes we see performers we like, sometimes performers we're indifferent to, and sometimes performers we actively dislike. Usually, if someone we don't care for appears on screen, we might grumble, change the channel, or just ignore it. Annoying, perhaps, but rarely cause for extreme action. Unless, reportedly, you were Elvis Presley, and the person on the screen was the singer Robert Goulet. This is one of the most infamous and specific examples of Elvis's reported intense dislikes. The story goes that Elvis harbored a particular animosity toward the smooth, baritone-voiced crooner known for his Broadway roles and television appearances. And this dislike allegedly manifested in a rather dramatic and, frankly, shocking way. According to multiple accounts, including those from members of the Memphis Mafia like Lamar Fike and Sonny West, Elvis was watching television one day when Robert Goulet appeared on the screen. Elvis's reaction wasn't just to change the channel or mutter a complaint. Instead, he reportedly picked up a handgun. Firearms were frequently present in Elvis's homes and shot the television set, blasting Goulet's image off the screen. Let that sink in. He allegedly shot his TV because Robert Goulet was on it. This wasn't just a casual dislike. This was a visceral, acted-upon hatred, at least in that moment. Why such an extreme reaction to a fellow entertainer? The reasons floated are varied and often speculative, as Elvis himself isn't here to confirm them. Some stories suggest it stemmed from personal encounters or perceived slights. Perhaps Goulet had said something negative about Elvis, or there was some interaction that rubbed Elvis the wrong way. Others speculate it might have been professional jealousy, although Elvis was arguably in a league of his own fame-wise. Goulet represented a different kind of entertainer, the suave, traditional vocalist, and perhaps Elvis felt a rivalry or disdain for that style. Another angle revolves around Elvis's then-wife, Priscilla. Some rumors, often unsubstantiated, suggested Elvis might have been jealous or suspicious regarding Goulet and Priscilla, although there's little concrete evidence for this. It might have simply been that Elvis found Goulet's on-screen persona irritating. Maybe it was the way he sang, the way he looked, something intangible that just pushed Elvis's buttons. Regardless of the precise reason, the act itself, shooting the television, is what makes this dislike so legendary and extreme. It speaks to Elvis's impulsivity, his access to firearms, and the insulated world he lived in where such an act could occur without immediate consequence. Destroying expensive property over a TV appearance seems almost cartoonish, yet it's a story repeated consistently by those who were there. Apparently, it wasn't a one-off incident either. Elvis reportedly shot other television sets when displeased with the programming, though the Goulet story is the most famous. This wasn't about television in general. Elvis loved watching TV, often having multiple sets going at once. It was about the specific appearance of this specific individual triggering an intense, violent reaction. It transforms the everyday act of watching television and encountering someone you dislike into a bizarre anecdote of rock and roll excess and intensely personal animosity. It's a stark reminder that behind the charm and talent, there was also a volatile side to Elvis and his dislikes. Even for something as commonplace as a singer on TV could manifest in truly extraordinary ways. The image of Elvis Presley, gun in hand, taking aim at Robert Goulet's smiling face on a flickering screen, is a potent illustration of how intensely he reportedly felt and acted upon his dislikes. Number 6. People touching his hair without permission. Hair. For many people, it's just hair. You wash it, you style it, or don't, you get it cut. Friends might playfully ruffle it, partners might run their fingers through it. Sometimes strangers might even comment on it. While most people have some level of awareness about their hair, it's not typically a fortress protected from all unauthorized contact. But Elvis Presley's hair wasn't just hair. It was the hair. That jet black, perfectly sculpted pompadour, later evolving into fuller styles, was as iconic as his voice or his dance moves. It was a symbol of his rebellion, his style, his meticulous attention to image. Countless hours and bottles of hair dye and styling products went into creating and maintaining that look. It was, in essence, a crucial part of the Elvis Presley brand, instantly recognizable and widely imitated. Given its importance and the effort involved, it's perhaps not surprising that Elvis was reportedly extremely protective of his hair and intensely disliked people touching it without his explicit permission. This wasn't just about casual, unwanted contact. It was about preserving the carefully constructed image and perhaps maintaining a boundary of personal space that was constantly being challenged by his overwhelming fame. Think about the mobs of fans, the constant crush of people wanting a piece of him, literally. Hands reaching out, trying to touch his clothes, his face, his hair. For Elvis, his hair might have represented one of the last bastions of personal control over his physical self in the face of overwhelming public adoration and intrusion. Allowing someone to touch it was an act of intimacy or trust. Having it touched without permission was a violation. Members of his entourage and stylists have recounted how particular Elvis was about his hair. Only specific people were allowed to cut, dye, or style it. He knew exactly how he wanted it to look, the specific products to be used, like his preferred hairspray, the precise shape and volume. Messing with that perfection, even with a seemingly innocent touch, was apparently a serious offense. Imagine being Elvis, spending significant time getting your hair just right, only for someone, a fan, an acquaintance, maybe even a friend caught up in the moment to reach out and touch it, potentially mussing it or leaving fingerprints on the carefully sprayed surface. Reports suggest his reaction could range from a sharp word or a cold stare to genuine annoyance. It was a boundary reinforced by his fame and his meticulous nature. This dislike goes beyond simple vanity. It speaks to the pressure of maintaining an iconic look day in and day out. His hair wasn't just hair. It was a statement, a responsibility. Protecting it was part of protecting the image, the legend. It also touches on the fundamental human need for personal space. When you're as famous as Elvis, that space constantly shrinks. People feel a sense of ownership, a right to touch the icon. Disliking unauthorized hair touching was perhaps a way for Elvis to push back, to assert that he was still a person with boundaries, not just public property. So, while fans dreamed of running their fingers through that famous black mane, the reality was reportedly quite different. Unless you were given the green light, touching Elvis's hair was strictly forbidden territory. It was an everyday impulse for adoring fans, perhaps, but for the man himself it was an intensely disliked intrusion, a violation of his carefully crafted image and his shrinking personal space. His hair was his crown, and he alone decided who could touch it. Number 5. Hippies and long hair on men. Later in life. The 1960s and 1970s saw a massive cultural shift, particularly among young people. The rise of the counterculture brought with it new ideals, new music, and new styles. Notably, long hair on men, beards, psychedelic clothing, and a general rejection of established norms. This hippie movement swept across America and the world, representing peace, love, freedom, and often anti-establishment sentiments. It was an everyday sight. Young men with shoulder-length hair, faded jeans, tie-dyed shirts. Ironically, Elvis Presley, the man who had scandalized conservative America in the 1950s with his suggestive moves, and his own signature hairstyle, which was considered long and rebellious for its time, reportedly the long hair commonly worn by men in the late 60s and 70s. This seems contradictory, doesn't it? The original rebel disliking the new rebels, but accounts from those around him suggest that Elvis, particularly as he got older, grew increasingly conservative in some of his views and tastes. He reportedly found the unkempt, deliberately nonconformist look of many hippies offensive or disrespectful. Sources claim he would make disparaging remarks about men with long hair, sometimes associating the look with laziness, lack of patriotism, or drug use, an irony given his own struggles with prescription medication. It wasn't just a passive dislike. He was reportedly quite vocal about it. There are stories of him commenting negatively on people he saw on the street or on television who embodied the hippie style. Why this shift? Several factors might have been at play, according to reports and observations. Firstly, Elvis was deeply patriotic. He had served proudly in the U.S. Army, and the anti-war sentiments often associated with the hippie movement might have clashed with his own values. He famously sought a meeting with President Nixon in 1970, expressing his desire to help combat the drug culture and what he saw as anti-American elements among the youth, the very culture often visually represented by long hair and counterculture fashion. Secondly, it could have been a generational gap, pure and simple. Elvis belonged to an earlier generation of rebellion. His style, while shocking in the 50s, was still rooted in a certain kind of groomed, deliberate presentation. The hippie look was often intentionally messy, rejecting the very idea of meticulous grooming that Elvis still adhered to. Even his longer 70s hair was carefully styled. He might have simply found the aesthetic sloppy or unattractive according to his own standards. Thirdly, there might have been an element of feeling bypassed or misunderstood. The music and culture were changing rapidly. While Elvis was still hugely popular, the cutting edge of youth culture had moved towards psychedelic rock, folk protest songs, and harder rock sounds, often performed by musicians who looked very different from him. Perhaps his dislike for the hippie appearance was tied to a feeling that his own style of rebellion was being overshadowed or dismissed by a new generation whose values and aesthetics he didn't share or understand. It's fascinating to consider the men who once represented youthful rebellion becoming critical of the next wave of nonconformists. It highlights the complexities of cultural change and personal evolution. The long hair and casual dress that symbolized freedom and individuality for one generation were for Elvis in his later years reportedly symbols of something he disliked and distrusted. It was an everyday visual marker of the changing times, and for the king, it seems those changes weren't always welcome. His reported aversion to the hippie look provides a glimpse into the mindset of an icon grappling with a world and a youth culture that was rapidly evolving beyond the one he had originally helped to shape. Number 4. Singing some of his own movie songs. Being a musician, especially one as prolific as Elvis Presley, involves performing songs, lots of them. It's the core of the job, the everyday reality of recording studios and stages, or in Elvis's case, movie sets. You learn the lyrics, you find the melody, you put your voice and soul into it. Ideally, you connect with the material, you enjoy singing it, and that passion translates to the audience. But what happens when you're contractually obligated to sing songs you don't believe in, songs you find silly, poorly written, or just plain bad? That was reportedly the situation Elvis often found himself in, particularly during the peak of his Hollywood movie career in the 1960s. And according to numerous sources, including Elvis himself in Moments of Candor, he intensely disliked many of the songs he was forced to record for his movie soundtracks. Think about the sheer volume. Elvis starred in 31 feature films between 1956 and 1969. Most of these were musicals or comedies featuring multiple songs, often written quickly by staff writers, specifically for the plot, however flimsy it might be. While some movie songs became genuine hits, Can't Help Falling in Love, Jailhouse Rock, Viva Las Vegas, many others were less than stellar. We're talking about tunes like Yoga is as Yoga Does, Song of the Shrimp, There's No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car, or Do the Clam. Elvis, a man deeply rooted in gospel blues and country music, a man who genuinely loved to sing powerful ballads and energetic rock and roll, reportedly found performing these novelty songs increasingly frustrating. He knew they were often subpar, far removed from the music he cared about. Yet, due to demanding contracts managed by Colonel Tom Parker, he had to record them, album after album, movie after movie. Musicians who worked with him during these sessions have described his occasional lack of enthusiasm, his going through the motions, his sometimes sarcastic comments about the material. He reportedly referred to some of them as dog crap. Imagine having to put your legendary voice, your global reputation, behind lyrics about clams or shrimp, or contorting serious practices like yoga into nonsensical verses just because the script demanded it. For a serious artist, it must have been creatively stifling. This dislike wasn't just about musical taste, it was about artistic integrity. Elvis reportedly felt trapped by the formulaic nature of his movies and their soundtracks. He longed to do more serious acting roles and to record music that challenged him and resonated with his true musical passions. Instead, he often found himself on set, sometimes in ridiculous costumes, singing lyrics he found meaningless or absurd. Priscilla, Presley, and others close to him have spoken about his deep unhappiness with this phase of his career. The initial excitement of Hollywood had worn off, replaced by a grind of churning out predictable films and forgettable songs. He felt the quality of his music was suffering, and it pained him. Performing these disliked songs became a large part of his everyday working life for nearly a decade. This intense dislike for some of his own required repertoire highlights the conflict between Elvis the artist and Elvis the commodity. He loved to sing, but he hated singing those songs. It's a poignant reminder that even for the biggest star in the world, the everyday reality of the job isn't always glamorous or fulfilling. Sometimes, it involves doing things you intensely dislike, even if it means putting your voice to a song of the shrimp. It dares his eventual triumphant return to live performing in 1969, where he could finally choose his own set lists and sing the music he truly loved, leaving the clam dancing behind. Number 3. Being called the King. Nicknames and titles are everyday things. People get called Chief, Boss, Champ, Doc, or endearing pet names. For celebrities, nicknames often become iconic, shorthand for their public persona. Michael Jackson was the King of Pop. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. Bruce Springsteen is the Boss. And Elvis Presley, arguably more than anyone, became known worldwide as the King of Rock and Roll, or simply, the King. It seems like the ultimate title, a sign of unparalleled success and cultural dominance. Who wouldn't want to be called the King? It implies power, respect, mastery over one's domain. Fans used it with adoration. Journalists used it as a default descriptor. It became intrinsically linked to his identity. Yet, according to many reports and anecdotes from Elvis himself and those close to him, he intensely disliked being called the King. This might sound shocking. Why reject such a regal complimentary title? Elvis's reported reasons were rooted in his deep sense of humility and his strong religious beliefs. He was raised in the Assembly of God Church, and his spirituality remained a core part of his private life. In his worldview, there was only one true king, and that was Jesus Christ. He reportedly felt uncomfortable, even embarrassed by the nickname because he saw it as blasphemous or presumptuous. He would often gently correct people who used it, saying things like, "No, honey, there is only one king," gesturing upwards. He didn't see himself as royalty, despite the palaces he lived in and the adoring subjects he commanded. He saw himself as a singer, an entertainer, blessed with talent, but not divine. Imagine the constant barrage of people calling you king, intending it as the highest praise, while internally you're cringing because it clashes with your deepest held spiritual convictions. It puts his famous humility in a different light. It wasn't just an act for the cameras. It seems to have been a genuine discomfort with being elevated to a status he felt he didn't deserve, especially a title he reserved for his religious savior. Friends and members of the Memphis Mafia confirmed this aversion. While the world hailed him as the king in his private circle, the name was used sparingly, if at all. He preferred Elvis, E., or other personal nicknames. The King moniker was part of the external noise, the public persona he couldn't fully control but reportedly didn't embrace. There's a famous clip from his 1977 Elvis in Concert special, one of his last recorded performances. He looks frail, but his spirit is there. At one point, someone in the audience hands him a homemade crown. He accepts it graciously, but seems almost sheepish, setting it aside quickly. It's a visual representation of his reported unease with the royal trappings assigned to him. This dislike adds a fascinating layer to his complex personality. The man who seemed to have everything, who reached the absolute pinnacle of fame, remained uncomfortable with the ultimate symbol of that fame. It suggests a grounding, a humility that persisted despite the whirlwind of adoration. He appreciated his fans. He understood the phenomenon he had become, but he reportedly drew a line at accepting a title he felt belonged only to God. So, while the world continues to call him the king, it's worth remembering that the man himself reportedly intensely disliked the everyday use of that very title, finding it too heavy a crown to wear. Number 2, jeans, denim jeans. Is there any item of clothing more ubiquitous, more fundamentally everyday, across cultures and demographics? From farmers and construction workers to fashion models and tech billionaires, jeans are a universal staple. They represent durability, comfort, casual style, sometimes rebellion, sometimes conformity. We wear them to work, to relax, to go out. They are for many the default pants. But for Elvis Presley, jeans reportedly represented something entirely different, something he intensely disliked and actively avoided wearing for most of his adult life, especially off stage. Why this aversion to such a common garment? According to numerous accounts, including from Elvis himself, his dislike stemmed directly from his impoverished childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi. During the Great Depression and the years that followed, Elvis's family struggled financially. They lived in modest homes, sometimes relying on community support. In that time and place, denim jeans, often overalls or sturdy work pants, were strongly associated with manual labor, poverty, and the working class. They were practical, durable clothes worn for hard, often low-paying jobs, farming, factory work, chores. They weren't a fashion statement. They were a uniform of necessity and hardship. As Elvis achieved phenomenal success and wealth, he reportedly wanted to distance himself as much as possible from those early years of poverty. He embraced flamboyant, expensive clothing, tailored suits, flashy silks, custom jumpsuits, luxurious fabrics. These clothes were symbols of his transformation, his arrival, his escape from the struggles of his youth. Jeans, in his mind, were reportedly a stark reminder of where he came from, a past he didn't want to revisit through his wardrobe. Think about the power of clothing as a symbol. For Elvis, shedding the denim of his youth was part of shedding the identity of the poor country boy. He had worked incredibly hard to achieve his dreams, and his distinctive, often extravagant style was a visual manifestation of that success. Putting on a pair of jeans might have felt like stepping backwards, like betraying the glamorous image he had so carefully constructed. It wasn't that he never wore denim. There are photos of him in denim jackets or shirts, particularly in certain film roles or casual settings. But the classic blue jeans as everyday wear? Reportedly, not for Elvis. He preferred slacks, dress pants, or the custom-made outfits that reflected his unique status. Even his casual wear tended to be more polished than a simple pair of jeans. This dislike is particularly interesting given how jeans evolved in popular culture. By the 60s and 70s, jeans had become symbols of youth, rebellion, and counterculture, ironically. Things Elvis himself embodied in the 50s. Yet his personal association remained stuck in the past, linked to hardship rather than cool. While the rest of the world was embracing denim as fashion, Elvis reportedly continued to view it through the lens of his childhood poverty. It's a powerful example of how personal history and deep-seated associations can shape our preferences, even for something as commonplace as a pair of pants. His intense dislike for jeans wasn't about the fabric or the fit. It was about the memories and feelings they evoked. For the man who became king, ends were reportedly a reminder of a time before the kingdom, a time he preferred to leave behind, choosing instead to dress in the regal splendor befitting his hard-won success. The everyday uniform of millions was for Elvis reportedly a symbol of a life he had escaped. Number 1. Fish, especially the smell. Food. It's the most fundamental everyday necessity and pleasure. We all eat multiple times a day. And we all have preferences, foods we love, foods we tolerate, and foods we absolutely cannot stand. Common dislikes might include Brussels, sprouts, liver, or maybe certain strong cheeses. But for Elvis Presley, the reported ultimate culinary enemy, the food item that topped his intense dislike list, was fish. Not just a specific type of fish prepared in a way he didn't like. Reportedly, all fish. And it wasn't just the taste. It was primarily the smell. According to numerous sources, including his former wife, Priscilla Presley, in her book Elvis and Me, Elvis harbored such a profound aversion to the smell of fish cooking that he banned it entirely from Graceland. Imagine that. A complete prohibition on an entire category of food within his home. Priscilla recounted how she once made the mistake of having fish for dinner while Elvis was away. When he returned unexpectedly, he was reportedly so overwhelmed and disgusted by the lingering odor that he declared fish would never ever be allowed in the house again. And apparently, it wasn't. The Graceland kitchen, famous for churning out fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches and other rich southern fare, became a strictly fish-free zone. Why such an extreme reaction? Like many intense food aversions, the exact origin isn't definitively known, but it was clearly a deep-seated, visceral dislike. The smell of cooking fish can indeed be strong and pervasive. For someone with a sensitive nose, or perhaps a negative past association with the smell or taste, it could easily trigger disgust. Elvis, as we've seen with noise and perhaps other sensitivities, might have just been particularly attuned to or bothered by strong odors he found unpleasant. Think about the logistics. Graceland was constantly full of people, family, friends, staff. Meals were communal events. Banning a common food like fish required vigilance. Staff had to be trained, guests informed. It speaks to the power Elvis wielded within his own domain. His personal dislikes became house rules, no matter how inconvenient or unusual. This wasn't just a mild preference like, "I'd rather have chicken." It was, reportedly, a powerful, almost phobic reaction. The mere scent could ruin his mood, make him uncomfortable, even angry. It paints a picture of a man highly sensitive to his sensory environment, needing to control it to feel comfortable and at ease. The smell of fish represented a disruption, an offensive intrusion into his sanctuary. Consider the contrast. This global superstar, adored by millions, living a life of seemingly limitless options, was reportedly defeated by the aroma of cooked fish. It humanizes him, showing that even icons have their peculiar battles with everyday things. while fans clamored for his autograph. Elvis was possibly just hoping no one nearby had recently eaten tuna. The fish ban at Graceland is one of the most frequently cited examples of Elvis's specific dislikes, likely because it's so relatable. Many people dislike fish, yet so absolute in its implementation. It wasn't just avoided, it was exiled. It stands as the reported pinnacle of his everyday aversions, a common food rendered completely unacceptable by the king's intense dislike, primarily driven by its inescapable, and to him, intolerable smell. From dark socks to the king title, Elvis had his quirks, but the reported war on fish might just take the cake, or rather, the peanut butter and banana sandwich.